and welcome to our session on monitoring student understanding with the Google Forms for the secondary classroom. My name is Tom Driscoll. Thanks for joining us today. So whether you're in this session live with us now or you're accessing the recording of this later on YouTube, the goal of today is to try to address a few different things related to Google Forms. Some of it might seem a little bit more introductory and basic, but I think if you're relatively new to using this as a formative assessment tool, we're going to cover some of those core features at the beginning. But then if you have been using it for quite a bit, we are going to venture into some more advanced uses of Google Forms in the classroom with some examples of use cases at the secondary level. So hopefully a little bit of something for everyone in our session today. So a quick introduction. My name is Tom Driscoll. I'm an instructor for EdTechTeacher. I started out as a high school social studies teacher in a school we piloted, Google for Education when it was first coming out, then Chromebooks, and then eventually I merged over into a new role as the digital learning director in a regional school district in Rhode Island. Since then, I've transitioned to a full-time instructor for EdTechTeacher, working with school districts across Massachusetts, New England, and then even in other parts of the country. So this is the 10th session of this series. And if you're new to the series, this is actually a partnership between EdTechTeacher, the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and Google for Education. So the three of us have been working together to put together this workshop series. We started over the summer. So if you joined us for any of those, then we ran, I believe it was a 6 or 7 part summer learning series with all different workshops. We got feedback from participants and folks wanted some more topics moving into the school year. So that's what we've lined up for you guys from now until I believe the end of the winter, even early spring. We're going to keep doing some workshops. We're going to keep them concise, right? So we're going to stick to one topic per session, and we're also going to differentiate some of them based on grade level. So right now, I actually have my colleague Ava running a similar session with Google Forms designed more for elementary folks. So for future sessions, we are going to have that differentiation between secondary and elementary for many of the topics. Last logistics thing before we go in. So if you're viewing this live in the Zoom, or if you're viewing the archive through YouTube, all of the slides can be accessed at that bit.ly link. So at the bottom of the screen here, you'll see it's bit.ly/ETTDESE10. We're going to try to keep that same naming convention moving forward. So if you just swap that out for the number of the session, you'll be able to get the slides. But I do have a lot of tutorials and resources linked into this slide deck. So I do highly recommend punching that in and then saving that into your drive. Just save the whole Google slide deck if you want. Or if you want to make a copy of it, then you can edit it, take some notes. I know that's a preference of some participants because then you can actually go in and edit this as you go. All of the materials at Google at EdTechTeacher are Creative Commons, so you guys can feel free to share this out with whoever you like, as long as there is some attribution to EdTechTeacher. All right, so let's dive right on in. So as far as the topic itself, we're going to look at Google Forms from a formative assessment standpoint, and as far as monitoring student progress. There are a lot of ways to use Google Forms. A lot of you guys have probably used this in the past, but specifically today, we're going to take a look at how you can use it to get relevant academic data at different phases of the instructional process to guide your decisions moving forward. All right, so it's just basic assessment practices before, during, and after a lesson. As we go through this, we're also going to highlight specific examples of these Google Forms in different ways that you can leverage them, whether before class, during class, or after class. If you're just joining us now, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to start out with some of the more basic ideas, but as we progress, it will go into more advanced uses of Google Slides. The way I'm going to design this first part, especially the live tutorials, is there are slides that I will reference, but I'm going to jump over to another tab and just do a lot of this in real time with the sample form. As we go through this webinar, if you guys have any questions or anything that I do a live demo of that you would like me to go back to, feel free to add that to the chat. And then basically once we stop the recording of the webinar, I can stick around and answer any follow-up questions you guys may have in the last 10 minutes or so of our workshop. If you're watching the archive of this and you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at the contact information on that first slide. On social media, it's at tomdriscoll.edu, or you can just head to my website and shoot me a message that way. Okay, so the agenda for today, we're going to start out with kind of the what and why behind Google Forms. I assume most of you are familiar with this to at least some degree, so we don't need to spend a ton of time on that. And then I'm going to live demo some core features. Now, this actually caught me by surprise, but in the last few weeks, there have been some changes to Google Forms. I'm not sure if you guys caught some of this, but for instance, the setting menu is very different. So as I was preparing for our workshop today, I did realize that even the screenshots I had from about a month ago are already outdated. So we are going to dive into some of the new format. And then again, if you have any questions, feel free to jump in. I do see a couple folks are just joining us. So again, the slides at the bottom, you guys can access that there. All right, so Google Forms, what and why? So what are they? Essentially, it's a quiz or survey tool. It's free, it's web-based, and it's integrated into Google Workspace for Education. Now, I'm sure everybody on the call or viewing this has Google for Education in their district, so that's not a big deal. If you aren't, if you're part of another ecosystem, like say you're a Microsoft district, then you may be able to use this with a personal account, but this is really recommended for Google for Education schools. So why might you use this? Just a couple initial things right off the bat. The first is that there's different question types. And actually, I'm looking at the wording of that. That's a little bit misleading. It's not multiple choice question types. It's multiple different question types, including multiple choice. The other thing is you can start to integrate things like files, images, links, and videos. So, and we'll talk about this towards the end. Yes, it's designed for assessments. However, it's also an excellent tool for instruction and remediation and even some enrichment that you can build right into the form. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to our branching forms discussion. All right, so third thing is that there are different ways that you can share this with students and that students can collaborate together, right? So I think those two ideas are really important because we want this to not just be a one-way, I ask a question, they respond. Eventually, as you get to more advanced uses of forms and having students use forms, this can be a tool that they use themselves as a creation tool or part of projects, or just to work collaboratively with others. Last thing, which we will dive into, is the idea of quickly getting information on student understanding. So I think that's one of the biggest values of EdTech, especially over the last 10 to 15 years, is that the idea that students have to wait like 2 weeks for information on how they performed on a task, that lag in information and the time it takes is basically non-existent at this point as far as quick formative assessments. There are so many technologies out there that you can leverage to give kids quick feedback, almost instantaneously in some instances, or if not instantly, quicker. So we'll talk about that idea of summaries of responses and links to spreadsheets. All right, so when would you use a Google form? This is completely up to you as an educator, but the most common uses of it. So there are three main ways that teachers use this. It can be before the lesson. So maybe you have a quick assignment they do for homework leading into the next class just to get their background knowledge. So when I was teaching social studies, sometimes before I launched into a new unit or a new topic, I would give them a quick pre-assessment to do, and then I could identify kind of where we were at. One thing that I did quite a bit was when I was teaching my AP students, a lot of times there would be a unit that, say I was on the Revolution, maybe they had 2 or 3 years worth of curriculum already on it. But say I'm teaching an AP European history class and we're talking about, the Age of Enlightenment, some may have never heard of that. So a quick pre-assessment just gives me an idea of how long I need to plan for a specific topic. I could use it during a lesson. So right in the middle of class, I can do a quick Google form, launch it, see how my students are doing. Then I could do it as like an exit ticket. So my lesson's done. I could have a few quick questions, just gauging their understanding. Or if I wanted to, I could have almost like a stock form at the end of class. Some of you may have leveraged something like this before, but essentially you just have a template that you just push out every single day. And then it's just a quick way to wrap up class. Maybe you tweak it a little bit per class. So those are the main ways that we see this used for monitoring student progress. So 2 examples right off the bat, because these are the most commonly used ones. The first is a daily check-in. This is one example of what that could look like. So just bear with me while I close out some of my other tabs here. All right, so this is an example of a warm-up. Very simple, straightforward, but essentially you go through and this was designed for a blog post, so some of the language doesn't exactly match up, but essentially you would have them put their name in there, or if you have them, you could just do, there's a button where it will track their their email address, so it does it automatically. You can pick their period. And then here are just some general questions about how they're doing that day, how well they slept. This could be what are they doing outside of class? And then you have a warm-up question. This could be something specific to something you put on the board or something you're projecting. The reason why I like this one is that you can use this same like template every day if you wanted to. You don't have to keep making new forms. And that's another suggestion that I really want to emphasize. Make this easier for yourself. Like, don't make it complicated. If you have a really good system and you want to replicate it, just do that and then feed your information into that same sheet. It's going to save you a ton of time. This was my first real venture into Google Apps for Education. I think it's when Google Forms first came out. I don't even think Google Classroom didn't exist yet. And I had the pieces of paper, right? So I had the kids walk in, I had this giant stack of bell ringer activities. And then at the end of the class, they'd have another stack of warm-up slips, and I had around 130 students, which isn't out of the norm for all the, high school folks here. And maybe middle school folks as well. So there were days I would have like 250 pieces of paper on my desk. And if you're still doing that, you don't need to live that way, right? You don't need all of that paper anymore. All you have to do is just create a quick warm-up activity, a quick exit slip, and then you can reduce all of that headache of going through 250 pieces of paper every day. All right, so that is the warm-up. Exit ticket, bell ringer, same idea. This is just a quick example of how you could set this up. So that's kind of like square one, how you would use this. If you already know how to do that and you want to look for some more advanced uses of it, stick around because we will be going into some of those in a little bit. All right, so this next part, I'm going to go over pretty quickly because I assume you know how to do it, but I do want to address this for folks that might be relatively new to forms. All right, so a few different ways you can start it. You can start in Drive. That's my preferred way to do it. You go into Drive and you go down to that drop down where you click on New. For some reason, it's not one of the automatic 4. Why? I don't know, but you have to click on the More button. It goes to Forms. You can get in that way. That's my preferred way. Some people though, and again, this is just completely based on preference. If you want to go to forms.google.com, that's essentially its own app in a way where it just categorizes all of your forms in one spot. If you want to do it that way, go for it. And they actually have a few different nice templates right at the top if you wanted to use some of those. And then there are a few other little hacks like form.new that'll actually create a form automatically just by typing that in. So a few other different shortcuts. All right, so once you're in there, a few things that do kind of trip people up. There are a few different basic layouts that you'll see. The first is the edit view. There's the live form view. And then there's the spreadsheet that have the answers. If you're not sure the difference between those three, that could be something we talk about after. I assume most of you guys get that part of it, but just real quick, edit form, that's where you edit. Live forms where they answer it, or you can do a quick practice run through of it. And then the spreadsheet is where if you wanted to push all of your information to a separate Google Sheet, it can go there. It does live within Google Forms, but if you want to push it to a sheet, you can do a lot more with the student data in the spreadsheet than you ever could with the main Google Forms platform. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second. All right, so this is the part that's changed. So I'm going to jump into a new form just to go through this with you because it is different than it was even a few weeks ago. So we're going to take some time to pop out to that. All right, so I'm going to go into my Drive. I'll start right from scratch here. So from Drive, oh, here's another little tip. If you want to create bookmarks in your bookmarks bar, this might seem like a little thing, but once you create it, if you just delete the name of it, it's just going to put the app icon. All right, so you see how I have all these little icons here? Well, I know what Google Drive's icon is, so why do I need it to say Google Drive next to it? All right, so just a little quick tip to save yourself some space up on that bookmarks bar row. All right, so I'm in my Drive. I click on New. And oh, how about that? Now Google Forms is in the top 4. All right, so we have Google Forms. It's going to bring me to a new one. And just a super quick tour. This is where you build and edit. This is where your responses go. This green button is where all of the information goes if you want to make a spreadsheet. And this is the new settings tab. If you were looking up here for the settings button like I was not too long ago, this is where it used to be. Now it has its own tab. We'll get to some of the specifics here in a second. Now, here's the most common mistake I saw in the district that I worked in, the district that I was a digital learning director in, and also with others that I come across with this. So many people do the mistake of when they try to send a form or add a collaborator to a form, right? So if you click add collaborators, that's different than having them fill out the form. You wouldn't believe how many times I've had like a school principal or something add everybody to a form. And then instead of answering the form, everyone's editing the form. So don't do that. So if you want to send people a form, don't add them as a collaborator. The only time you would ever add collaborators to a form is if you actually wanted them to see the student data, or if you want them to edit the question. So if you're working in a team, say you have someone from like a resource teacher or an itinerant teacher that you want to add to it, that's fine. But if you want them to actually submit the form, this is the way I do it. There's a few ways to do it, but I like to I click the eyeball, right? So I click the view form, I copy the link, and I send it to whoever I want to do it. I could post it in Classroom. I could do it. It's a few different ways you can do it. But that for me, maybe it's just because that's how I started doing it and I never changed. But to me, that seems to be the easiest way. You click the eyeball, get the link, share it. How else would you have people do it? So I could also click the send button. And by default, it's email. So I could email it to people. If I want to click on the link button, again, that's another option. I just get the link. I get a shortened one and send it to them. If I wanted to embed it into, say, a Google website, I could do that. Although I think this is kind of redundant because if you go to your Google site, there's actually a button to embed your form. So you don't even need to do this really. So I'm not even sure why. I guess if this would be an option if you're embedding it into something other than a Google site, it could be a good option. All right, so those are the basics of going in, creating it, sending it out. So next up, we'll talk about the question types. So this is where the vast majority of people only use two. They use multiple choice or they use the text. And if that's all you use, that's fine. All right, so you don't need to use a ton, but this is where you type your question. This is where you can add a picture to your question if you want to add, say, a Google image search. Let's just say, see what comes up here. All right, the First Amendment, let's do something like that. All right, so this is where you can add a quick image to your question if you like. And on the right side is where you can add in multiple choice. So again, the vast majority of answers are short answer, paragraph, or multiple choice. But just know that you do have some more options. So just for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of them, but just to highlight the ones that are there. The checkbox is great if you have a lot of different choices that or multiple choices they can use. Multiple choice, they can only choose one. Checkboxes, they could check multiple ones. The drop down is good if you have a ton of options, right? So you could do a multiple choice, but say you have 10 or 15 different options, like say you're doing a survey or something like that. Drop down makes more sense because it'll make the form a lot shorter. You won't be scrolling down for a half hour to get through all this stuff. File upload is if you want students to submit something through the file. And honestly, since Google Classroom came out, I haven't seen a whole heck of a lot of teachers use the file upload. But if you did want to use that as a way for kids to submit files, they could do that there. Linear scale, that's where if you wanted to say gauge, a certain degree of familiarity with an idea, or say I was doing like a political spectrum exercise, could have them choose something like that. And the multiple choice grid and checkbox grid, that's a little bit more of like, kind of like a rubric style. Again, not used as often, but that's available. And then you could also do the date check and the time check. All right, so let's dig a little bit deeper into what you can do here. So on the right side, this is where you can build out different parts of your quiz. This is how you can add multiple questions. You click on that plus button. If you want to duplicate a question, right, that's actually on the right side here. You go down to duplicate, and then it will just copy. Say it's a similar question, you can do that. So that's the two ways you add a new question. Click duplicate or the plus button. If you have questions that exist in another form that you want to pull in, that's the button that you can click to pull in from another form. This is if you wanted to add like a section break or a title with information. This is helpful if you wanted to add in some information. So I could say, check out this website before answering the questions. And what I can do here is say I wanted them to go to a website called, let's say, All Sides. This is basically a website that takes all different news from the week and it categorizes it left, center, or right. So you can see my social studies background's kicking in here. So if I wanted to add this in as an example, what'll happen is if I go to view my live form, you can see that now this is a clickable link that kids can access with my form. So again, an example of how you can actually build in some content as you go through. So next you can add an image just like I did to the question. I don't need to demo that, but that's if you want to do a full screen image. And the video is important too, because say, for instance, you want kids to view a video like part of a flipped classroom or part of a station, you bring this in and then you have that content available for them. If you already know the URL, you paste it in. Otherwise, you can just type it in. Let's just do first. And there we go. So Crash, what is this? Hip Hughes history. So this guy's kind of a nut job and he makes some interesting videos. Okay, so that's the basics of building out your form. Questions come up about the video. Can you add your own video? Yes, but it's not going to play in here. So if you just have your video in, say, like Screencastify, or if it's on Google Drive, you can still add a link like I showed you up here. So you get the link to your video pasted in, but the only videos that can embed live on this are actual YouTube videos. And unfortunately, just haven't supported other platforms, but I think it's still a nice workaround just to put the link to it. Now, this next one here is not used too often, but it's super important if you're going to do branching forms. We're going to get to branching forms a little bit later. That's where you can have multiple pathways within a form. It's a little bit complicated, but it can be really valuable. You would click Add Section. The other reason you may want to make this is that if you don't want the form to be too long, you want to have multiple parts to it. Or say, for instance, like the website times out or something. That rarely happens anymore, but it could. So this kind of prevents some of that issue from coming up. But we'll come back to add a section a little later. All right, so those are the question types. When you're within a question, there's also more things that you can do to customize this. So on the bottom right, there are a couple options you can select. The first is required. So if I want to make sure that all of these have to be answered before they submit, turn on that button. And then there's a little hidden, semi-hidden 3-dot button here. This is important too. So the description, not as important, but these next two, go to section based on answer and shuffle option order. We'll come back to this one. This is how you make forms branch into different directions. Based on their answer, they go somewhere else. In a way, it's like a little mini adaptive software that you can build on your own. This next one is to shuffle the option order. So not every student has the same order, just a way to mix things up and to some degree prevent some cheating. All right, so I believe those are the basics for that. Now let's go to the responses. So as students submit responses, you're going to see them show up here. This is where you'll get an initial overview of how well students did, especially if you have it self-graded. If you want to do more with the information, though, this is where you create a spreadsheet or push it to an existing Google Sheet. It may seem a little intimidating at first, but once you do it and start to work with sheets, and we actually have a Google Sheets session coming up soon if you're not sure how to do formulas and sorting and making maps and all of that, that's coming up, I believe, in our next session. But this is how you would create a spreadsheet that all of your student data goes to over time. So when you click on the 3-dot button, this is where you can decide on notifications. So if you click this button, you'll get notifications for new responses to your email. For the average Google form, for the love of God, don't turn this on. You're going to end up with like 5,000 emails throughout the year for form submissions. So how would you use this? So the way that I use this in class was, say I made a form for like makeup work or revised work that would just be like an alert to me that someone submitted something again. Now, I know there are some similar features within Google Classroom and that you can use that too. But if you wanted to make a separate standalone form for like makeup work or something along those, or say it's a form for when students want extra help, then that way you would get a notification. So this is good for if it's a form with sporadic responses that you're not checking on your own, but you want to go to your email. This makes it go to a specific place. So if I have a general form that has all of my assessment data from, say, Q1, I could push every single form to that same worksheet. And each tab within there is going to be some different data. So that's another way that you can do it. And then if you wanted to download it and do some crazy stuff with the data, you could also do that here. All right, so now the moment we've all been waiting for, the new settings menu. So a lot of this stuff used to be up here on the right. Now it is in the right tab. So first one, which is super important if you're doing graded assessments, is making it a quiz. Now, all you do is click that button and you'll have a few different options. None of the options are necessarily new. It's just how the layout is set up. So the first thing is, do you want them to all see the information immediately, or do you want to review it first and then push it out? If you're worried about kids getting the answers and sharing it with everyone else in the class, don't immediately release the submissions, because that's what some of them might do. So you may want to look at it first and then push it out to your students. Now, the next thing you can do is see, what do they actually see? So if you wanted to, you could turn all of this off. So if you turned all of these off, you could give them, say, for instance, how many points they received, but not exactly what answers they got right or wrong. So if you did that immediate release, then you wouldn't have to worry necessarily about like the student cheating. Now, this is the default questions. Now, if you remember until they did this update, you would have to manually add points to every single question that you wanted to do. That was kind of dumb. I don't understand why they had that as a default, to be honest. But now you can change it so that every time you make a question, it automatically adds it as 1 point. You're not going to have to adjust anything. I just think that's a big time saver compared to the way it used to work. All right, so the next one, responses. So do you want to automatically collect every email address? Usually that's a yes. Why not? Right. So that way you don't have to add in a question with name. You're not going to have to worry about naming conventions. You just know exactly who has submitted it based on their email. If you wanted to turn this on, you could adjust it to always or when requested, but I think it does help so that they see, or they have a record in their email of what they answered. This is if you wanted them to change their submission after editing. This is probably not great if you're doing an actual quiz, but it can be available. Now, this one, it's probably going to say your domain. So I highly suggest keeping this on. This will be on by default. Now, you don't need to necessarily have it on. And actually, if you're getting responses from maybe families or people outside of your school, you actually have to turn that off, or else they won't be able to submit your form. And then this is limit 1 per response. This is off by default. You'd have to turn that one on. All right, so next, these are a couple different newer options. So if you haven't checked out this new settings menu, this might be helpful to lock into. So first off, that progress bar. So as they're going through, they'll see a visualization of how much they've done if they're doing multiple parts of the form. This you can make the default automatic shuffle. So you don't have to do that for every question. It's automatically going to shuffle all of the questions for you. Again, just all little things to save you some time. If you want to have an automatic confirmation message, you can put that in there as well. And then this is where you can view the results with your respondents. So if they want to see how the class did, you can add that too. All right, so last couple things that are here, they have some other defaults that are set in just to, again, save you time as a teacher. So they have the form defaults. So this is where you can automatically collect all email addresses by default. It doesn't ask you ever again to do that. And then making all questions required by default. Again, another time saver, because before you would have to check that button for every single question. And was it hard to do? No, but it took time. So now if you just turn these 2 buttons on, you're not going to have to manually do that for all of your questions again. So again, another little time saver. All right. So a couple final things before we jump back to some more examples and advanced uses. This top button here are the add-ons. Now, what's going to happen is you're going to have a list of add-ons that you can add to your Google form. I'm actually not sure why this is kind of slowing down on me. But this will show up on the side. There's not as many as they used to be, and depending on your domain, there may not be a lot unlocked. So you may not have a whole lot there to choose from. But something that you do have a little bit more control over is the customization. So you can create your own header, you can create your own theme. Some of them are actually like kind of GIF images, right? So if you see this here, it's actually a kid shooting a basketball jump shot. And that will actually play live in the background. Again, this is just a style thing. It's based on what you want it to look like. And you can see here that in my live session, I can see I have that new format. All right, so that is the basics. Again, if you guys have any questions on anything I covered, feel free to add to the chat or to reach out. All right, so let's jump back to the slide deck here. If you're in the slides, you're accessing them. For those who may have just joined, this is the link, bit.ly/ETTDESE10. I'm going to jump back down. These are all just screenshots of things I already talked about, so we don't need to necessarily go through all of these. But if you ever need to go back, that is available for you. All right, so this next part, it's called Prefilled Links. This is a way that you can actually develop a Google form and say there's information that you already want filled in automatically for your students. A few different ways that you can think about why that might be helpful. There's actually a website, you may have heard of it. It's called Ditch That Textbook. Matt Miller, I believe, is the guy that created it. He has a whole team of people, I believe, that contribute now. But this was a blog post. It was a guest post by Craig Clement. That's an interesting GIF image. And he kind of goes through how you would go about entering in pre-made data. So it could be like student IDs or something along those lines. He has a quick video tutorial of how to do it, but he also has some screenshots. So we don't need to go through all of the details with that, but to get to that part, you click on the three dots to the top right, get Prefilled Link. It's going to open up the same form that you just built, but what's going to happen is you put in all the information that you want in here, and then at the bottom, it's going to say Get Link. Now, once you get this link, this is what you could then share out with students and have that pre-filled information available for them. So again, is it useful for everything? No, but it could be something worth checking out. All right, so I do see a question that came up in the chat. How do you retrieve the students' specific forms to attach to a portfolio? All right, so the form responses, is that what you're referencing? All right, so I'm not quite sure with that one, but Charmaine, if you want to stick around towards the end of the session, then we can kind of go through that right when the webinar is done. We can do a quick live demo of what you're looking to achieve there. All right, so heading back to the slide deck. All right, so this next part is about how to integrate audio and video into your form. Now, this is something that has been more applicable over the past few years because of new tools that integrate very nicely with Google Forms. Because again, a lot of times maybe you want them to view or listen to audio or video as part of your form, and vice versa. You may want them to submit audio. And actually, if you haven't come across the Moat extension, that's one that's just taking education by storm right now. It's a way that you can ask questions through audio in a form where they just click a button and they hear you ask a question, and vice versa. Students could submit answers through audio, right? And that's something that's pretty wild. Like that hasn't been available. That came out probably in the last couple of years, but that is a really nice addition to Google Forms if you want students to submit vocally as opposed to typing. It's also a great accessibility thing because again, typing can be a challenge for some students, whether it's for motor skills or visual impairments or things like that. So I think that is a really nice feature. So there are multiple ways to do it, but these are the three that we at EdTechTeacher recommend. The first, as I just mentioned, is Mote. I'm going to do a live demo of what that looks like in a second. It's a Chrome extension, and once you install it, you can then ask questions into your form that students can hear and students can submit. You can also use all this stuff in Google Classroom, which is pretty nice. The second is Screencastify. So if you are interested in checking that one out, essentially it's a screencasting tool that you can publish to YouTube and then pull in that video into your Google form. And then lastly, you could also embed anything from from YouTube into your forms. All right, so how does this work? You're going to see once you create or once you install Mote, you're going to see these little M buttons everywhere. So anywhere you see that, you can click on it and then add an audio point. And I'll show you guys what that looks like. So again, from the teacher standpoint, that's a way that you can provide another modality of asking questions. From a student response, that's a way that students can share verbally. This is just a quick example of the workflow, but I'll go through it live so you guys get a better idea of what that looks like. Screencastify, same idea. I know a lot of school districts in Massachusetts have Screencastify whitelisted. Some even have like the pro version of Screencastify. So if you just create a Screencastify and put it in your drive, or if students do that, you'd have to add the link to the form. However, if you publish it to your YouTube channel, if you have a YouTube channel, then you can automatically pull it in. So that's up to you whether you want to do that workflow or not, but just know that it is possible if you wanted to venture. All right, so Catherine, great question. All students do not need Mote to hear your Mote comments. They would need Mote installed to leave their own. So that's just the one thing you'd have to check with your district. So I know all of you guys, or I assume you guys are secondary. It's not that big a deal with the student data privacy and all of that. Most districts have approved it. Elementary, it's a different story. I know districts, especially for kids under 12, I know the FERPA, COPPA issues can be a little bit more intense. But I would suggest if you don't have Mote whitelisted for students, propose it to your school district. I know Massachusetts, the Student Data Privacy Consortium, I think it's SDPC, right? So maybe ask your district about that. It's essentially a vetting service for safety of apps. If you need to go through that process, I think it's worth it if you don't have Mote. And if it gets denied, it is what it is. But I think it's at least worth trying because it seems like such a versatile tool that you can use in Google Forms, you can use in Google Slides. Basically, any of the Google Suite, you could use those audio tools. All right, so next one is going to be branching forms. But before we do that, I do want to do the live demo of how you would leave a Mote comment. Okay, so back to that sample one that I was editing. Just get rid of this. Okay, so you can see in the questions here, I have this Mote button. So if I click here, oh, of course it's making me sign in. 1 second. Usually you only have to do this once, but my computer logged out and you have to just bear with me a second. So you got to go through this whole song and dance about giving access, just like every other Google app. But then once you have it done, it should work pretty seamlessly. All right. Let's try this again. So this is my Mote audio comment that I'm inserting as a teacher into my Google form. And what you'll see is up top, there's a link. And if I click from the student view, now if the student goes in, it turns into a nice button. I play it. So this is my Mote audio comment that I'm inserting as a teacher into my Google form. So do you see how easy that was? I literally clicked the M button, I spoke, and that was it. And if the students have this installed, that's how easy it is for them too. So if they went into this and, say I click on the view button, I wanted to answer a question. So I'm gonna have to do an open-ended question. So actually, you know what? I'm glad that happened. The only way students can add it is if you have a question where they can add text. Right, so I would actually have to do either a paragraph or short answer question, but I'll just do a test one so you guys can see what the student side of this looks like. So say, for instance, I'm a student in Mr. Driscoll's class. I open this up. I'm going to scroll down. And for this question, now instead of typing in, I can click on the Mote button. This is my student perspective answering a question that was asked to me in this Google form. All right, so I'm good. I am going to add that. Oops. And what will happen is that button will now show up on the other side for the students to listen to. So the next question might be where does that go? Like, how does the teacher hear those voice comments? And what will happen is when you go into the spreadsheet that has the responses, when you open up that spreadsheet, next to the student's name, it's going to be that Mote link with the button. You click on it, you'll be able to hear it, and then you're good to go. All right, so that is using Mote. Moving on to the next topic, this is the idea of branching forms with Google. So if you haven't done this before, I'll break it down a little bit in the 2 different ways that I've seen teachers use this. All right, first way, I call it like performance-based. And what I mean by that is, if you get the question right, you move on to the next topic or a harder question. If you get it wrong, it brings you to a different branch of the form that maybe gives you some remediation, some more instruction, maybe has you watch a video, read a blog post, something like that, and then they try to answer it again or answer a similar question. So in a way, if you've used any adaptive learning software before, like IXL or some of those tools, that's how they're designed. Like as students answer them right, they get harder questions. As they get them wrong, they get easier questions. You can basically build that on your own through Google Forms. So that's one way to do it. The second way to do that is based on choice. And I'll show you examples of each. So say, for instance, I teach music, and I'm teaching about 4 different instruments to my class, and each student had one of those 4. Instead of making 4 different Google Forms, one for each student, I could make a branching form that has one initial question and then 4 branches. And the first question I could say is, all right, which instrument did you pick? I could say like piano, cello, guitar, saxophone, whatever it is. If I played piano, I could pick on the piano button and it would bring me to the branch of questions about the piano, right? So it's just a way that you can give kids some more choice and flexibility. And then also you can keep everything within one form. You don't need to have things all over the place with multiple forms for the same class. So how do you do this? So I'm going to do a live walkthrough, but there are some tutorials in here. If you want to check it out in more detail, there's a link to a walkthrough blog post created by Sean McCusker, who's an excellent teacher out of the Chicago area. He worked with us at EdTechTeacher a little while back, an excellent tutorial there. And then there's also an example of a branching form that you can do yourself. And it actually teaches you how to make a branching form in a branching form. So how cool is that? So say, for instance, I click here, I say, I've never made a branching form. It'll ask me, hey, do you want to learn through a blog post? Do you want a visual and written description, or do you want to watch a video? You click that, it's going to bring me to a video on how to make a branching form. So you can kind of see how it works through that example if you wanted to check that one out. For those who are watching the video archive, this is actually linked to the slide deck. So just go back to the beginning of the video, click that bit.ly in, and then you can access those examples there. All right, so I'm going to back out to my form and show you how I would make this into a branching form. Actually, I'm going to start fresh because this one's kind of a mess right now. All right, so I'm going to do new Google form. And I'm just going to make this one, I'll just say, I'll just stick to my social studies theme here. We'll call it First Amendment. So my question could be, which of the following are not First Amendment freedoms? All right, so I have my answers here. I can say speech, religion, press, and I'll say bear arms. So first step is I have to have at least 3 sections. For a branching form to work, you need at least 3. That's the minimum for this to work. So I'm going to click on that 3 times. So now I have sections 1, 2, 3. Now, just to kind of kick the tires with this to get used to it, I like to advise just doing a performance-based one where it's like if they get it right, they go to section 3. If they get it wrong, they go to section 2. So also to help you remember, let's just say this can be my review, and this could be next topic. So that's step 1. Step 2, I have to go into the question, into the multiple choice. I click on the 3-dot button. Then I go down to go to section based on answer. Then it's going to create a new section up on the top right. And this is where there's a drop down. And what you would do is for all of the correct answers, you would go to the section that you want them to go to if they get it right. So I have 1, 2, 3. Bear arms is incorrect because that is in, of course, the Second Amendment. If I click there, I go to review. What'll happen now is students that get it wrong aren't going to go to the next topic. They're going to go to the review section number 2. So now here, perhaps I could say, all right, please review this video on the First Amendment, then try again. So one easy way to do this is to just duplicate the question, right? So I go back into here, I duplicate, I drag it down. And what you could do just to make it a little bit trickier for the students is you could just change up the wording or just a similar question related to it. But at least you have something to work off of here. You don't have to completely do it again from scratch. So the other thing I'll do is I'll actually add that remedial piece to it. So I can say, First Amendment, I can look for a quick video or pull one in that I already know. So now what'll happen is I drag this to section 2. Oop, it's already in section 2. I'll put it above the question. And now I have that section. So let's see how this works in Actions, because you always want to test it out just to make sure it's working. So I click the preview button. I'm going to get it wrong on purpose. So say I click bare arms. So what happens now is it's going to bring me to the First Amendment video. I'll review this. I'll try again. And lo and behold, now I go to my next topic. I'm good to go. I submit the form. So this is more of an activity than an assessment, because one of the first questions that tend to come up is, well, how do I keep my student from just going back and then just finding what the right answer is and just clicking through? The point of this isn't to be like a graded assignment. If you want to just get a quick gauge of their understanding, just do a regular form, just see how they're doing. If you want them to engage in activity where they can learn something as they're doing it, and you just frame it as an activity as part of, maybe it's a station rotation or part of a homework or just part of a class activity, that's the use of that, right? So it's not like a gotcha grading thing. It's more of an activity thing. So hopefully that clarifies the usage of it. Another way that I thought was interesting is I've even seen some teachers and students use this as like a choose your own adventure storytelling project. So if any of you guys teach ELA, check this one out. This is an interesting example of a teacher that basically told a digital story, and based on how they went through, you got to make choices on your path through the story, right? So you probably heard of choose your own adventure stories before. That's another way that you can build this in, and that students could actually do this as well. It's a nice, fun activity. Now, I don't have time to go into it too much, but if you've also heard of breakout rooms, like the actual like breakout rooms that you could go to, like some people just go to them on weekends just because they're fun. You have to solve these clues and go through the different parts of the maze. Teachers have been making digital breakout room style activities. So the most popular one is called Breakout EDU. You may have heard of that before. Some teachers have been creating branching forms that are kind of like breakout rooms. So like there's different clues in the resources. And then based on how they answer the clue, only one of those options kind of unlock the room so that they can get to that next part of the form. So one feature that teachers that use that, or it's a little bit different, it's called data validation. I didn't go into that in too much depth, but just to show you what that looks like, because that may come up a lot actually with math, or if you want like a specific answer. So if I go into my open-ended question, this is where on the bottom right, I actually have a response validation button. Now this won't show up on multiple choice. It only shows up in the open-ended, but I'm going to click there. And now I have a few different options. I can either do the length of the text. So I could say like, this has to be, you know, a minimum of this many characters or a maximum of this many characters. That's a nice feature to it. Or you could have the actual expression. So does it contain, does it match, not match, or doesn't contain? So if you wanted to absolutely contain a specific number or a specific type of text, that's what you would add there. And then the error text, if say there's a common mistake, like they spell it wrong or they capitalize things, or you can put the custom error text, like if they get it wrong, what would your hint be to have them get it right? This is actually really cool if you're doing those digital breakout rooms, because they get it wrong, you can give them a follow-up clue. Anyone who's been to one of those, like I went to one with my family last year, and we'd have the walkie-talkie out because we couldn't figure it out, and they would give us clues over the loudspeaker. In a way, this is the digital version of doing that. You can give those clues through that custom error text to the students that are trying to figure out the answer. All right, so that might have seemed a little quick, but hopefully that makes sense to you guys. All right, so a couple other examples if you were interested in checking these out, just to see what other teachers are doing with Google Forms. So first, this is a late work submission form. I kind of mentioned something similar to this, but this is nice if you wanted to just have like a generic late work form. And if you have the response email notification set up, anytime a student turns in late work, you'll get a quick email saying that they submitted it. So that's one idea that I thought was pretty interesting. Also, sometimes folks have digital sign out sheets if they're signing in and out of classrooms, if they're signing out equipment. I know a lot of stuff hasn't been able to be signed out recently, but I know some librarians use similar things to this for audio visual equipment. Some teachers actually use this for rubrics as well. So if you haven't used it for the rubric, there are a few different ways that you can set up. This is a very basic version of it through multiple choice. You could also use the grid option to create rubrics. So that's another one, but this is if you want a very straightforward rubric. You can fill this out or make your own example of it. It's also good for self-assessment. Having them, I did this for some research projects. I would have the different criteria and they would have to fill that form out, kind of self-assessing and choosing where they are. And I did the response validation where if they rated themselves too low on something, it would actually have an error message like, oh, don't submit this yet. You're not done. You have to revise something in there. All right. So if you want an even bigger collection, I'm going to get back to the recommendation I had to check out that textbook website. There are 25, I think there's even more other ways that you can use Google Forms in your classroom. We actually covered most of them, but if you're looking for some other ways that you can use this for all sorts of things, so not just for formative assessment, but say you run an after-school club or you're communicating with parents or you're doing newsletters, there's actually a lot of things that you can do in here just for quick examples. All right, so we covered a lot of ground. I am going to, after the recording stops, stick around for another few minutes. If anyone has any questions or wants to dive in, let me know. For everyone that attended, first, thank you so much for joining. I'm glad you guys came. Feel free to reach out anytime. We have a feedback form. So I'm actually going to click this link here. I'm going to drop it in the chat for the folks that are here, if you don't mind filling this out, I would super appreciate you guys doing it. Even if you watch the recording of this and you want to fill that out, it's the last slide. We'd love to hear your feedback. A question came up, how do you guys get the recording? So I am going to post this to our EdTechTeacher YouTube channel. Everything's going to be there for all of our sessions. Also, our director will be responding to everybody that registered for this session with a link to the recording. So everybody will get that email to them at the end. If you want to sign up for future workshops, that bit.ly link's there up at the top. I also have a link in the slide deck. Our next workshop's on December 2nd. That's going to be monitoring progress with docs and slides. I believe our Google Sheets one will be after that. So again, thank you guys so much for coming. I'd love to hear your feedback and feel free to connect and reach out anytime. Thanks, everyone.